Hello everyone, and happy Halloween. Creepypastas and creepy 4chan threads from a time long gone remind me of my early days on the internet when I had just started finding my footing and discovering my interests as a child and teenager. These stories shaped not only who I am today, but the very principle and philosophy that this channel runs on today. Stories such as Showers, 1999, Godzilla.exe, The Harbinger Experiment, and more led to a prolonged obsession with the weird and scary part of the internet, which led me to take it a step further and create a channel where I could talk about these interests and hobbies and provide history and my thoughts on these topics. However, before creepypastas and before I had extended access to the internet, there was one piece of media that would elicit a similar effect, a similar sense of dread and terror. Something that filled me with both fascinating intrigue and almost ruined my 8-year-old life for 2 weeks because I was so terrified of what the contents of its pages contained. A mysterious grimoire of unknown origin lying in the back of the school library, waiting for one poor soul to pick it up, unaware of what horrors lie in wait. I remember first seeing a copy of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark in about 2nd or 3rd grade. It was a part of the week where we all went to the library and picked out books to read, or in my case, look at the cool pictures of dinosaurs. While I was looking at the cool dinosaurs eating each other, one of my table mates was reading a peculiar book, a black and red outline with this eerie image of a humanoid creature's misshapen head glaring at me as I analyzed the image. I asked what they were reading. They mentioned in a rather condescending tone that it was a book about monsters, ghosts, and murder, and that they loved that kind of stuff, but I would probably be too scared for it. Odd red flags aside, I asked to see the book and they reluctantly handed it to me. It was there I was met with this image for the story The Thing. A terrifying, uncanny drawing of a skeletal man with deep sunken eyes staring back at me as I was frozen in fear. Needless to say, I could not sleep properly for the next month, and it led to maybe some repressed trauma and a long-standing phobia of eyes. But, more importantly, it led to an even more prominent obsession with horror, and something that would stick to me well into my early adulthood today. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was first summoned to this earth from hell itself in the early 80s and served as a collection of short stories composed of folklore, urban legends, and old campfire stories told throughout time. The stories were retold and compiled by Alvin Schwartz, an American author and journalist who spent more than a year extensively researching for each book in order to bring these stories together and to life. While a lot of these stories contained in the trilogy are already established tales, Schwartz rewrote and re-edited the good majority of them in order to modernize them and bring these stories into a new era. Schwartz cited influences such as T.S. Eliot, Mark Twain, Shakespeare, and more as partial inspirations for writing these stories. Since the trilogy's inception, several collected editions, single volume editions, box sets, remakes, and even an entire movie have been made to further show how much the original trilogy had on American horror and pop culture. Each of the books are about 112 to 128 pages in length, serving as an easy read for the target audience, mainly being kids in elementary and middle school. The stories are about 1 to 2 pages in length, and there are multiple chapters serving as different genres of stories. These can range from traditional ghost stories, classic urban legends, and even a final section that is entirely dedicated to making you laugh. I always enjoyed this final aspect because it showed that Schwartz knew the target audience in a way and gave the reader a chance to feel better after enduring the many horrors these books contained. Each chapter produced a foreword explaining what the contents of these stories were going to be about. I enjoy these as well, as they present a lighthearted way to let the reader know what they are getting into. Like with any collection of horror stories, some of the tales contained within all 3 of the books are really hit or miss, even back when I first read it. Some stories were badly translated, contained mediocre endings, didn't really correlate with the accompanying drawing, or were just generally boring. Yet, there are some really good heavy hitters here and stories that genuinely freaked me out for several years every time I would read or think about them. Stories that made me use my imagination in order to create my own experience of fear, whether or not an image was included in the story. Speaking of stories, a story that I always remember was The Big Toe. While this is the first story in the original book, The Big Toe made my imagination run wild, especially towards the climax of the story, in which the creature who the toe belonged to finally makes itself known after the main character chops it out of the ground and gives it to his father to put in the stew they are having for dinner that night. Weird plot points about potential necro-cannibalism aside, the part where the creature prowls through the house looking for the boy, groaning, "Where is my big toe?" This drove me nuts as a kid. Living in houses where my room was always at the end of a hallway, imagining a terrifying, monstrous being creeping down the hall to my room ready to attack and eat. Something that I like about the story today, and many of the stories in this chapter, is that they are jump scare stories, giving pointers and tips on how to scare people around you, kind of like a screenplay. While the big toe is not the best story in this book, or even in the trilogy itself, I still remember it fondly as something that used to both horrify and spark my imagination to an insane degree, furthering my love for horror and terrifying creature design. Another story I enjoy from the first chapter is Mitai Doti Walker, a very strange story regarding the bloody head that falls down the chimney of a haunted house every night. One night, a boy and his dog visit the haunted house and start to hear the mysterious voice singing from what appears to be outside in the woods, saying the phrase, Mitai Doti Walker. Strangely, the boy's dog begins to reply to the song with Lynchy Kinchy Kalimali Dingo Dingo. This concerns the boy as his dog has rightfully never talked before. The exchange gets louder and louder until suddenly the infamous bloody head drops from the chimney and inadvertently kills the dog from fright, only to then scream at the boy. This is a pretty strange but enjoyable jump scare story, and probably the best in its respective chapter. It's short, sweet, and has a really killer and memorable art piece to accompany it, making it a favorite amongst the trilogy's fans. While the traditional ghost stories are rather interesting, they are not my favorite in the trilogy. No. The ones I really enjoy are those that involve creatures and other unexplained occurrences that happen to the character. The reason I enjoyed creepypastas and continue to enjoy some of the more recent projects in horror are because of the antagonists. Serial killers hunting their next prey, unexplainable creatures previously unknown to man, and beings as old as time making their presence known are something that are more powerful to me, far beyond any traditional ghost story. Wendigos, alligators, the undead, a killer scarecrow, and more all line the book's pages, filling the reader with so many different emotions and feelings, banking in on so many different types of terror and fear for so many different people. It explains partially why Scary Stories was so polarizing. The stories managed to feed on several different fears that the readers would have, not just a fear of monsters or ghosts, but other real fears such as spiders, marriage and its destruction of independence, toxic masculinity and horrid fraternity practices, death itself, and just the horrors of everyday life. One thing that I never caught on to while reading these stories as a child was just how many of them didn't really have to do with monsters or ghosts, but were metaphors for real struggles and terrifying situations that can really happen. This further solidifies my statement of how the trilogy can grab the attention of any reader and draw them in by covering all kinds of different fears. However, this is not the main thing people remember these books for, as many of the 82 stories in the trilogy fall flat, to be honest. No, there are things more terrifying than words that lie within the book that changed unsuspecting readers' lives forever. The Art of the Scary Stories franchise is something truly memorable in both an artistic sense and horror sense. The art contained in this trilogy reverberates an immense impact on people's childhoods, far beyond any emotion the stories themselves could ever elicit. The Art of Scary Stories is something truly unique in a way that it manages to be so terrifying and uncanny, especially for what has been labeled as a children's book series. I remember when people would discuss something like the work of Junji Ito, they would mention his impeccable talent to make a page turn terrifying as a deliberate means to build suspense. I feel as though the same works with these books, though to a much more bare bones effect. No, these books more so build up to how batshit insane, disgusting, and absolutely horrifying most of the creature designs are in the trilogy. The art features several key factors that make it so effective in its delivery. These aspects include the lack of any discernible color, the uncanniness of how humans and even animals are drawn, and these inky, bloody strands that seem to ooze from every drawing. The art of the original series was illustrated by Stephen Gamble, an American children's book illustrator known for other book illustrations such as 1988's Song and Dance Man and 2001's The Burger and the Hot Dog. However, Gamble found some of his most recognizable and notorious work in the Scary Stories franchise, bringing each book to life far more than just the text itself. Aside from the obvious horror themes, Gamble's work is absolutely dripping with atmosphere. Shadowy and cold landscapes, decaying interiors, and smudged, hard to determine shapes have all brought a deep sense of emotion while reading. take a look at the accompanying image for the story The Thing. This image terrified me the most when I first read these books, more so than some of the more infamous stories in the trilogy. The figure's mushy, skeletal frame and deep realistic eyes staring directly at you as you read the first page is probably the source of my ongoing phobia with eyes. In fact, a lot of the art in these books have freaky shit staring directly at you, giving this sense of urgent danger as if you were right there in the story. We all know this image from the Haunted House story, which is still to this day one of the most violent and disturbing illustrations I have ever seen in a piece of written media, especially in one intended for children. I don't even know what to say about this image that hasn't already been said before, but what if I told you there was an image much scarier and much more triggering than anything else in the trilogy? There's a story in the first book titled The New Horse. It's a pretty interesting story about a witch who turns a farmer into a horse every night in order to use him to run errands. One night, the farmer's farmhand offers to sleep in his bed that night in order to catch the witch. He is then turned into a horse and is ridden to a party in which the witch is attending. After turning back into a human, he exacts revenge on the witch by turning her into a horse and getting her fitted with horseshoes to then be sold off to another farmer. The plot twist is that the other farmer is actually the husband of the witch, and when she turns back into a human, he finds her standing there with horseshoes nailed to her hands and feet. The story is pretty funny in a dark sense of humor sort of way. However, what throws that all out the window is this fucking image that is more harrowing than anything else in the book, solely based on how batshit insane it is. I have never in my life seen a horse drawn like this, and even viewing it for a short period of time is enough to drive one to the brink of insanity. In all seriousness though, it is just so jarringly goofy compared to many of the other monsters and beings found in this book, but still manages to get the point of its story across in just one short illustration. But if I ever see a horse that looks like that outside in the fields one night, I'm pretty sure I'd die right then and there. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is a piece of media that has stuck with me and will always stick with me for the rest of my life. It both terrified me to no end and helped me find out about myself and what I like, becoming one of the earliest examples of horror that I became obsessed with. If I never read Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark in my childhood, I don't think this channel would be what it is today, and have the content on it that it does for you all to watch. While these stories themselves don't exactly hold up well to this day, its impact on American culture and horror culture goes far beyond the material itself and has inspired countless writers and creators for many generations. This has been Yoshimi, and have a good night.